The sound of the wind howling through the steel beams of the crumbling fortress was the only warning he had before she screamed. Valen, a soldier with no rank to speak of, was locked in a deadly face-off with a group of mercenaries. His only concern was staying alive long enough to escape the deadly maze of this forgotten planet's ruins. But when the scream pierced the air, everything else faded away. Without thinking, he spun toward the source of the cry. Through the dust and shadows, he saw her, Elara, the mysterious woman who had been accompanying him and a handful of others on this mission. She was cornered, her back pressed against the jagged wall, her eyes wide with terror as one of the mercenaries prepared to throw a poisoned spear. His heart raced. He couldn't think, only act. The spear was already in the air, the shimmering metal gleaming like death itself, its poison designed to kill within minutes. There was no time to think about the logistics or consequences of his actions. He surged forward, throwing himself at her, knocking her to the ground and covering her with his body just as the spear hit. The impact felt like a freight train crashing through him. The sharp pain shot through his chest as the spear's poisoned tip punctured his side. For a moment, he couldn't breathe, couldn't see anything but a blur of pain and darkness. But then, Elara's soft gasp of surprise brought him back to his senses. "Valen," she cried, her voice filled with panic as she pushed at him, trying to lift him up. Why would you do that?" He tried to focus, his breath ragged as he managed to croak out, "Had to protect you." Her fingers were trembling as they pressed against his wound, her eyes wild. "You don't understand, you don't know who I am." He groaned, feeling the poison beginning to seep into his bloodstream. His vision blurred, and the world tilted dangerously. "Doesn't matter," he whispered, his lips dry. "Just survive." But Elara shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "You have no idea. You saved the wrong person." With a strange, almost surreal calm, she placed her hand over his chest, where the poison had begun to spread, and the air seemed to shift. A faint blue light shimmered around her fingers, and Valen's world turned upside down. His body felt light as if he were floating, the pain momentarily vanishing. He blinked, trying to comprehend what was happening. Then, as the light faded, Elara looked down at him, her eyes filled with an emotion he couldn't quite place. "You really don't know, do you?" she asked softly, her voice a mixture of sorrow and something deeper. "I'm not just some traveler. I'm Princess Elara of House Tyrannis. This was never supposed to happen." He blinked again, still struggling to stay conscious. "Princess." "Yes," she said, her face a mask of regret and something else, fear. "I was sent here on a mission of my own, to find a way to stop the war between the two factions. But you saved me. I don't even know what to say." Valen's thoughts were fuzzy, but one thing was clear, he had no idea what he had just gotten himself into. All he knew was that, despite everything, the betrayal, the lies, the constant fighting, he had saved someone important, someone who could change the course of an entire war. Elara gently lifted him, her powers glowing softly around her as she began to heal his wounds. The poison began to recede, but the consequences of what had just transpired were far from over. The mercenaries, who had been watching in disbelief, began to retreat as they realized their plans had failed. But Valen's mind was only half with them. He was too focused on the woman he had just protected, unaware that, in saving her, he had changed the very course of history. "Rest now," Elara said softly, her voice like a distant melody as she cradled him in her arms. "This isn't over. You've just become part of something far bigger than either of us." And as darkness took him under, Valen couldn't shake the feeling that his life, and the galaxy itself, would never be the same again. When Valen awoke, it was to the sensation of soft, cool sheets against his skin and a rhythmic beeping sound that made him groggy. His head felt heavy, and his body ached like he had been thrown into the heart of a starstorm. Slowly, his vision cleared, and he realized he was lying in a sterile, white room, far removed from the crumbling fortress where he had last seen Elara. He tried to sit up, but his body protested. A voice, calm and soothing, cut through the fog in his mind. "Don't try to move too quickly, you're still recovering." Valen turned his head, blinking as he saw Elara sitting in a chair by the bed. She wasn't wearing the tattered clothes of the mission anymore but a pristine, silver-trimmed uniform that looked both regal and military. Her eyes were soft but distant, as though she were lost in thought. "What happened?" Valen rasped, his voice dry. "You're alive," she replied simply, her eyes meeting his. "Against all odds, you're alive." He glanced down at himself, seeing the bandages wrapped around his torso. The memory of the poison spear flashed back in a rush. He had thrown himself on top of her, taken the poison, and something had happened. The healing light, her powers. "The poison," he murmured, trying to focus. "You healed me?" Ilara nodded, but her expression darkened. "I did, but it wasn't just my powers. There was something more happening. The poison was almost too much for even my abilities to counter. You shouldn't have survived." Valen frowned, pushing through the confusion in his mind. "Why? What's going on? Who were those mercenaries? Why were they after you?" Ilara looked away, her jaw tightening as if she were considering how much to reveal. She stood up and paced to the window, staring out at the unfamiliar world beyond. The sky was a swirl of violet and orange, the landscape alien and stunning. "I told you before," she said quietly, "I'm Princess Ilara of House Tyrannis. But what I didn't tell you is that I'm not just a princess, I'm the last one left. My family was wiped out during the last war, and I've been in hiding ever since." "The mercenaries? They were hired by the factions who want me dead. They think I'm the key to peace, or at least to ending the war between the two warring sides. But if they find me alive, they'll think I'm a threat. They don't know what I really am." Valen swallowed, feeling the weight of her words. He had saved a princess, yes, but not just any princess, the last heir to a fallen house. And she was more than just royal blood, she was a symbol of hope, of power, of change in a galaxy teetering on the brink of destruction. "You're the key to ending the war?" he asked, his voice thick with disbelief. "But I don't understand. If you're that important, why are you hiding? Why not step forward, claim your throne?" Ilara's shoulders slumped, the weight of her responsibility pressing down on her. "Because I can't. Not like this. Not until I know I have the support I need. The war has ravaged the galaxy, and both sides want me dead so they can control the fate of House Tyrannis. If I show myself now, they'll destroy me, and the fragile piece that's left will crumble. I'm not ready. Not yet." Valen lay back against the pillows, trying to process everything she had said. His mind was still foggy, his body still weak. But there was one thing that stood out in all of this. Ilara was a woman burdened with too much, trapped in a game she had never asked to play. "So, what now?" he asked quietly, his voice hoarse but resolute. Ilara turned back to face him, a slight sadness in her gaze. "Now we need to find allies. We need to convince the remaining factions that I'm not a threat. But I can't do it alone. I need you, Valen." Valen blinked, surprised. "Me? I'm just a soldier. I'm not part of this." "You are now," she said, her voice firm. "You saved me. That makes you part of this. Whether you like it or not, you know how to fight. And I know you're capable of more than you think. I need someone by my side, someone who can protect me and help me bring peace to this broken galaxy." Valen stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. This wasn't just about surviving. This was about saving everything he had known, and possibly everything he had never even dreamed of. "I didn't ask for this," he said slowly, but his tone had changed. There was no fear in his voice now, only the flicker of something else, something fierce, something alive. "But I'll help you, as long as it means ending the war and keeping you safe." Ilara's gaze softened, gratitude and relief flashing in her eyes. "Thank you, Valen. You have no idea what this means." He nodded, feeling the gravity of what lay ahead. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for a future with someone who might just be the key to saving the galaxy. And as the days passed, as they began to gather their forces and allies in the shadows, one thing became clear: the war wasn't just between two factions anymore. It was between everything that had come before and everything that could come after. And Valen would do whatever it took to make sure that Ilara, his princess, his ally, his purpose, would be the one to lead them into a new era. But little did he know, the real battle was just beginning, and it would take everything they had, and more, to win. Days blurred together as Valen and Ilara moved from one hidden outpost to the next, gathering allies, trying to piece together a network of resistance. It wasn't easy. The galaxy was fractured, divided between two powerful factions, both of whom would kill to control the remnants of House Tyrannes. The mere rumor of Ilara's survival spread quickly, stirring up trouble at every turn. Their first stop had been a neutral planet, Vexera, a world caught in the crossfire of the ongoing war. Here, they met with a faction of independent smugglers and mercenaries who had no loyalty to either side of the war but were known for their strong sense of pragmatism. It wasn't a glamorous first step, but it was a necessary one. The smugglers agreed to help, though they made it clear they expected payment in the form of information or favors down the line. It was on Vexera, in the shadows of a rundown cantina, that Valen first learned just how much was at stake. Ilara had sent him to meet with a contact, a former officer in House Tyrannes who had been presumed dead. The officer, Captain Jorik, was the last surviving commander of the Royal Guard, and if there was anyone who could help them find the right people, it was him. Valen found Jorik in a back room of the cantina, sitting in a dimly lit corner, his face scarred from years of war and betrayal. The captain had barely aged, his eyes still sharp, his posture stiff, but there was an unmistakable weariness in his gaze. "I didn't think I'd live to see the day I'd be sitting across from a Tyrannes," Jorik said gruffly as Valen sat down across from him. His eyes flickered to the side, taking in Valen's appearance. "You look like you've seen your fair share of hell, soldier." Valen met his gaze, his voice steady. "I've seen enough, but it's not about me, it's about her, Princess Ilara. We need your help, Captain." Jorik leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest. "And why should I help? House Tyrannes is gone. The galaxy is divided. The last thing I'm willing to do is waste time on a lost cause." "It's not a lost cause," Valen said, his tone firm. "Ilara's alive. She's the last heir, and she's fighting for peace. She believes there's a way to end this war, if we can get the right allies." Jorik raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. "Peace? You're talking about a dream, soldier. Both factions are too far gone. They'll never agree to peace. And if they find her," he stopped himself, his voice lowering, "if they find her, she'll be killed before she has a chance to speak." "Then we stop them," Valen said, his voice resolute. "We stop them before they can find her. You've been in this fight longer than anyone. You know the right people. We need your help to build a coalition. A real one, not just mercenaries and scavengers." Jorik's eyes softened for a moment, a flicker of something, nostalgia, perhaps, flashing in his gaze. But it was gone almost as quickly as it had appeared. "I knew your family. Your father was a good man, the last of the Tyrannes line. It's a damned tragedy what happened. I'll help. But I'm not doing this for peace, Valen. I'm doing this because she's the last hope for House Tyrannes. And maybe, just maybe, she can do what we couldn't." The captain stood, pushing his chair back. "I'll get in contact with the right people, but you'd better be ready. This won't be easy. The factions won't give up control without a fight." Valen nodded, determination burning in his chest. "We're ready." Back on their ship, the Stellar Dawn, Ilara stared out of the viewport, her thoughts far away. The journey was taking its toll on her. It was hard to trust anyone anymore. Every whisper, every shadow in the corners of the galaxy seemed to carry the potential for betrayal. Even those who had once sworn loyalty to her house had turned, scrambling for survival in a world that had forgotten what honor meant. She had always known the path to peace would be fraught with peril, but now, with each day that passed, it felt more and more like an impossible dream. She had tried so hard to keep the hope alive, to hold on to the vision of a future where the war ended. But now she wasn't sure what the cost of that dream would be. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts, and she turned to see Valen standing in the doorway, his presence a familiar comfort. "We have a plan," he said, his voice steady. "Jorik's in. He's reaching out to the old allies, the ones who can still be trusted. It's not much, but it's a start." Ilara nodded, her eyes drifting to the map of the galaxy displayed on the holotable in the center of the room. "It's a start," she echoed softly, "but it won't be enough. The factions are too powerful. We need something more, something bigger." Valen approached, his gaze steady on her. "What are you thinking?" She hesitated for a moment, her fingers tracing the lines of the star systems on the table. "We need to unite the factions, not just by force, but by showing them that they have no other choice, that we can offer something they can't get from each other. And I need to find the people who will stand with me, not for power, but for peace, For a future without war. Valen met her gaze, his expression resolute. I'll be by your side, Ilara, whatever it takes. Her lips curved into a faint, bittersweet smile. Thank you, Valen. But there's one more thing we need to do before we can start uniting anyone. And what's that? We need to take down the ones who think they can control everything, the ones who think they have the right to decide who lives and dies, the ones who've made this war their business. Valen's eyes hardened. You mean the ones who sent the mercenaries after us? Ilara nodded. We find them, we destroy them, and only then can we begin to truly build the future we want. As Valen stood beside her, a silent promise passed between them. The road ahead would be long, dangerous, and filled with enemies, but they would face it together, because in the end, it wasn't just about fighting for peace, it was about fighting for each other. And that was a fight Valen was ready for. The plan was set in motion quickly, though it wasn't without its risks. Ilara and Valen had managed to secure Jorik's cooperation, and with his help, they began reaching out to the scattered remnants of House Tyranny's old allies, military commanders, political figures, and underground resistance groups. The path wasn't linear. Each contact brought its own set of complications, and not everyone was ready to rally behind a princess they had thought was dead. Yet with each new connection, they found hope, a flicker of light in the endless darkness of war. Ilara, despite the pressure of her role, had grown more resolute. She no longer looked like a frightened fugitive. She carried herself with the weight of her lineage, and the crown that might one day be hers. Still, she couldn't escape the doubts that lingered in the back of her mind. Every time she closed her eyes, the weight of her house's legacy pressed heavily on her chest. Her people had been slaughtered, the galaxy was in chaos, and now, she was responsible for saving it, or at least, trying to. The first major move came sooner than expected. Jorik had managed to get word to a former ally, a powerful warlord named Varen, who controlled a significant portion of the Outer Rim. Varen had been a loyal servant of House Tyranny's before the war had fractured everything. His loyalty to her was uncertain, but he still had a soft spot for the royal family, and that was a start. Ilara knew that securing Varen's support would be crucial, not just for resources and manpower, but to send a message to the factions that she was not just a relic of the past. She was a force to be reckoned with. Valen and Ilara traveled to the Outer Rim, their ship cutting through the stars with a sense of purpose. The journey was quiet, the hum of the engines filling the silence as Ilara spent her time in the ship's small command center, running through strategies, calculating risks, and trying to prepare herself for the confrontation that awaited them. As they approached Varen's stronghold, a massive fortress that sat perched on the edge of a volcanic world, Valen watched Ilara closely. She seemed lost in thought, her fingers tracing the edges of the map displayed before her. He knew how much this moment meant to her, even if she didn't show it. She was carrying the hopes of a galaxy that had long since given up hope of peace. Ilara, he said softly, stepping closer, we're about to walk into the lion's den. Are you sure you're ready for this? She turned to him, her eyes unwavering. I don't have a choice. If we don't get Varen's support, everything we've worked for will fall apart. I need him. We need him. Valen nodded, but a flicker of concern still lingered in his chest. Just remember, it's not just Varen we're dealing with. There are a lot of people who want you dead, and not all of them are as obvious as mercenaries or warlords. Ilara's lips curved into a small, sad smile. I know, but I don't have the luxury of worrying about every enemy. Not anymore. Before he could reply, the ship's sensors beeped, signaling their arrival at Varen's stronghold. The volcanic world below was an inferno of swirling lava rivers and dark, jagged cliffs. The fortress itself was a towering structure of blackened stone, built to withstand the harshest conditions the galaxy had to offer. As they descended toward the landing platform, Valen's hand instinctively went to the hilt of his blaster. He didn't trust Varen, he didn't trust anyone in this war-ravaged galaxy, but his loyalty to Ilara was unwavering. He'd seen the way she had transformed in the past few weeks, how her strength had grown, how her resolve had hardened. She wasn't just a princess anymore, she was a leader. The moment the ship's landing gear hit the platform, the doors slid open, revealing a group of Varen's heavily armed soldiers. They stood in formation, their eyes scanning the ship with military precision. At the front of the group, Varen himself emerged, a tall man with a scarred face and an air of authority that was impossible to ignore. His dark eyes locked onto Alara, his expression unreadable. "You've come," Varen said, his voice a deep rumble. "I didn't expect it to be so soon." Alara stepped forward, her posture regal but unyielding. "You know why I'm here. Varen, I need your help. The galaxy needs your help." He studied her for a long moment, his gaze lingering on her face, as if trying to read her. Then he spoke, his words carefully measured. "Help, you say? What exactly makes you think I'll help you?" "House Tyrannis fell a long time ago, Princess. The people are divided. The factions are strong. There's no peace to be had." "I'm not asking for peace," Alara replied, her voice firm. "I'm asking for your loyalty. If you stand with me, we can stop this war. Together, we can unite the galaxy, but only if you're willing to take that risk." Varen raised an eyebrow. "And what makes you think I'll risk everything for you? You're the last of your line, your house is dead. Why should I risk my people's lives on a lost cause?" Valen stepped forward, his voice low but resolute. "Because if you don't, the war will continue, and you'll be swept away, just like everyone else. The factions won't care about your people, Varen. They'll use you as a pawn, then discard you when they're done." Varen's eyes flicked over to Valen, assessing him, before he turned his gaze back to Alara. A long silence passed, thick with tension, before he finally spoke again. "Perhaps you're right," he said slowly, "but don't mistake my help for loyalty to you. Princess, I'll help you, but only because it serves my interests, and if you fail, I'll have nothing to do with you." Alara met his gaze, unflinching. "Understood." Varen turned and gestured for them to follow. "Come, we'll talk more inside." As Valen and Alara followed him into the fortress, the weight of what had just happened settled over them. This was only the beginning. The path to peace would be long and dangerous, and there were still so many enemies to face. But for the first time in a long time, Alara felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years: hope. She wasn't alone anymore, and together, they might just be able to end the war. Inside Varen's fortress, the atmosphere was heavy with unspoken tension. The walls were thick, made of volcanic rock and reinforced with the technology of 100 years of warfare. The dim lighting cast long shadows across the high-ceilinged halls, and every step they took echoed in the vast silence. The air was thick with the scent of metal, ash, and burning fuel, a reminder of the harsh world that Varen had carved out for himself. Varen led them down a corridor to a private meeting room, a large, circular chamber with a long table in the center, surrounded by towering chairs made of polished stone. As they entered, a few of Varen's advisors were already seated, watching them carefully. It wasn't the most welcoming of receptions, but Alara wasn't expecting much warmth. Trust, in this galaxy, was earned through actions, not words. Varen gestured for them to sit, and the three of them, Alara, Valen, and Varen, took their places at the table. The warlord settled into the chair at the head of the table, his dark eyes fixed on Alara, as though he were still trying to decide if he truly believed she was the answer to the galaxy's endless conflict. "You've got my attention, Princess," Varen said, breaking the silence. "But you'll need more than words if you want my support. We both know that. You're asking me to risk my people's lives. I'm not willing to do that unless you can prove you're capable of more than just dreams of peace." Alara didn't flinch. "I'm not asking you to risk anything yet. What I'm asking for is time. Time to gather support and build a coalition strong enough to threaten the two factions that currently control this war." "And why would the factions listen to you? You're a lone princess with no army," one of Varen's advisors sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. Valen stood up, his presence suddenly filling the room. "She's not alone. We've already got allies gathering. But that's not the point. The factions won't just listen to her because she's royalty, they'll listen because we'll show them that they have no choice." Varen raised an eyebrow, his gaze shifting between Valen and Alara. "Bold words, but as much as you talk about unity, there's one thing I know for sure: the factions won't fall just because a few people decide to join your cause. Power doesn't work like that. It's a game of who holds the most cards." Alara leaned forward, her voice steady. "Then let's change the game." The room fell silent as Alara's words sank in. For the first time since she had entered the room, she felt the eyes of the room's occupants shift, just slightly, but enough for her to know she had made her point. Varen, ever the tactician, was considering her words carefully. You're not wrong, Varen finally said, breaking the silence, but I need more than your promise. What's the first step? What makes you think we can succeed where others have failed? Ilara paused, gathering her thoughts. The first step is simple. We make an example of those who think they control everything. We find the war profiteers, the faction's highest commanders, those who pull the strings from the shadows, and we hit them where it hurts. Varen leaned back in his chair, intrigued. I see. You want to destabilize the factions by striking at their leadership. But you're talking about war on a large scale. Even with my forces, we'd need more than that. We don't need to win every battle, Ilara said, her voice hardening with resolve. We need to send a message that the old way of ruling through fear is over. Once the factions realize that they can't control us, they'll start to fracture, and when they fracture, we'll have the chance to unite those who still believe in something better. We'll build our strength from the ground up. Valen nodded, his expression serious. We can't do it alone, but if you provide the manpower and the resources, we can make sure the first strike lands hard enough to shake the foundations of both factions. Varen studied them both, his eyes narrowing in thought. The wheels in his mind were turning, weighing the risks against the potential rewards. After a long, silent moment, he gave a slight nod. All right, he said, his voice low and deliberate. I'll help you, for now, but know this, Princess, the path you're suggesting won't be easy. The factions won't take kindly to any threat to their power, and when we strike, we'll have to do it quickly, with precision. One wrong move, and the whole galaxy could fall into chaos. Ilara stood, her gaze steady and unyielding. Then let's move quickly. We've wasted too much time already. Varen nodded, rising from his chair. I'll get my people ready. We've got a long road ahead of us, but I'm in, and if you can keep your promise, you'll have my full support. The days that followed were a blur of planning, preparation, and constant movement. Varen's forces, though not large enough to win a war outright, were highly trained and well-armed, perfect for the kind of covert operations Ilara envisioned. They moved in the shadows, gathering intelligence, identifying weak points in the leadership of both factions, and setting up their first targets, high-ranking officials, corrupt military commanders, and powerful arms dealers who profited from the ongoing war. The first strike came quickly, a coordinated assault on a weapons depot controlled by one of the faction's most powerful generals. The attack was swift and brutal, hitting the heart of the general's supply lines, and leaving a trail of confusion in its wake. Ilara's forces didn't overextend. They struck hard, then disappeared into the wilderness of the Outer Rim, leaving their enemies reeling and unsure of where the next blow would come from. It was exactly the kind of chaos she had hoped to create. But even as the victory felt sweet, Ilara knew that the hardest part was yet to come. This was only the beginning. The factions would regroup. They would retaliate, but now they were on notice. The balance of power was shifting, and for the first time in a long time, Ilara felt a spark of something she hadn't dared to hope for, real change. As she stood beside Valen in the quiet aftermath of the attack, she glanced at him, her voice softer now. It's working, Valen. We've taken the first step. He met her gaze, a rare smile playing at the corners of his lips. One step at a time, Ilara. But we're on the right path. She nodded, the weight of the road ahead still heavy on her shoulders. But now, there was a sense of purpose driving her forward. The war wasn't over, but it would be soon. And with allies like Varen, with Valen by her side, Ilara was beginning to believe, truly believe, that peace wasn't just a dream. It was a future, and she was going to fight for it. The next few weeks passed in a surreal haze for Captain Elena Cortez. The Unity continued its mission, transporting supplies and offering medical care across the galaxy. But the attack and subsequent retaliation by Earth's war fleet had left an indelible mark on her. While the Marauders were gone, their attack had awakened something within her, a new understanding of the fragile balance between peace and the brutal necessity of defense. The galactic community took notice. News of the destruction of the Marauder ship spread quickly, and despite the unspoken outrage that had been simmering in the galaxy for years, there was a shift in the atmosphere. No longer could the galaxy look at Earth as just a peaceful, benevolent species. Earth was capable of far more than just compassion. One afternoon, while the Unity was docked at a medical outpost on a distant planet. Elena received a message from Earth Command. The transmission was marked urgent and came through a secure channel. She sat in her quarters, the weight of the past few weeks pressing heavily on her shoulders, and opened the message. Captain Cortez. The message began, the voice of Admiral Heller crackling through the static. This is a follow-up to the Marauder incident. The situation has escalated. Multiple factions, including some who had previously remained neutral, are now sending inquiries about Earth's stance on the galactic order. We need to understand your thoughts on how the Unity and Earth at large should respond going forward. Elena stared at the screen, processing the words. She had known this moment would come, the political fallout of Earth's decisive action. The Marauder attack had not been just a blow to Earth. It had shaken the foundation of the galaxy's power structures. There would be questions, and with those questions, there would be consequences. She leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. Earth had always been a beacon of hope, a sanctuary for those in need. But now, the galaxy had seen a side of humanity that was raw, unapologetic, and dangerous. There were those who would try to test Earth's resolve, seeking to exploit any cracks in the armor. Others might call for even harsher measures, pushing humanity further into the role of a military power. Captain Cortez took a deep breath. It was time to make a decision. After several minutes of contemplation, she keyed in her response. She had always been a healer at heart, but now, her role was changing. It was clear that Earth couldn't stand idly by anymore. Admiral Heller, she began, her voice steady but firm. Earth's actions were necessary, and we must ensure that such an attack never happens again. But we cannot become an empire, nor can we allow the galaxy to view us as conquerors. We are protectors, we defend the helpless, but we do so in the service of peace, not to impose our will, but to ensure that peace is maintained. The universe must know that if they threaten innocence, Earth will respond, but if they seek peace, we will offer it. She paused, reflecting on the weight of her words. It wasn't just about Earth anymore, it was about a new paradigm for the galaxy. Humanity had changed, but they could still be the leaders of compassion and strength. The transmission ended, and Elena leaned back in her chair. A part of her wondered if the galaxy would ever be the same, or if this was the beginning of a new era, one where the line between peace and war was always blurred, and where Earth stood as both a symbol of hope and an unyielding defender of the helpless. Days later, Elena was called to a meeting with the highest-ranking officials of Earth Command, including Admiral Heller and several diplomats. It was time to discuss the long-term ramifications of the Unity's mission and the broader response to the Marauder attack. As Elena entered the room, she was greeted by the Admiral, who gave her a nod of respect. The room fell silent as everyone took their seats. Captain, Admiral Heller began, you've earned the respect of the fleet. Your actions during the Marauder attack have solidified our position in the galaxy. But now we face the next challenge. How do we proceed? The galaxy will be watching, and some will try to test our resolve. The question is, how do we ensure that peace endures while remaining strong enough to protect it? Elena stood tall, the weight of her role now clear. We don't abandon our core principles. We remain true to the values that make us who we are: compassion, unity, and healing. But we also recognize that there are those who will never be moved by diplomacy alone. And for them, we must be prepared. We don't seek war, but we will not let it come to our doorstep unchallenged. The room was quiet for a moment. Then the diplomats exchanged looks of agreement. Earth had made its stand, and now, it was time to forge a new path forward. The decision was made that day. Earth would not only continue to be a beacon of hope and peace, but it would also strengthen its defense systems, ensuring that no one would ever again threaten its people or its allies. A new era had begun, one where Earth would walk the delicate line between compassion and defense, healing and power. As Captain Cortez left the meeting, she looked up at the stars outside the observation window. She knew the galaxy would test Earth, but she also knew something deeper. Humanity had survived the worst the universe could throw at them, and they had done so with dignity. They would not be pushed around, and they would never forget the lessons they had learned. No matter what came next, Earth would be ready, and the galaxy would never again doubt humanity's resolve.